All right, let's see if we can solve this quadratic equation using factoring. So we have 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 equals 0. And what I want to do is I want to factor the left-hand side so that I have a product equal to 0, and then I can just set my individual linear factors equal to 0, which will be a whole lot easier to solve. So how do we factor this guy? Well, really there's a couple of different ways. You could either do trial and error, where you just set up your parentheses and try to figure out what would FOIL to give you this as an answer. Sometimes that can be a little difficult when the x squared has a number other than 1 in front of it, when it has a coefficient, like in this case of 2. So what I think I'll do in this video is factor by grouping, because that works well a lot of times when your leading coefficient is not 1. So what we're going to do is we'll take 2 and negative 15, we're going to multiply them to get negative 30. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for all the different factorizations of negative 30. We've got negative 1 times 30 and 1 times negative 30. I've got 2 times 15, and I have negative 2 times, 2 times negative 15, or negative 2 times positive 15. One of those has to be negative. And what I'm looking for as I'm going through these factorizations is I'm looking for somebody that would add up to a positive 7. The first factorization doesn't, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. But then when you get down to like negative 3 times 10, the product is negative 30, but also check out the fact that these would add up to positive 7. So when you found a factorization like that, what you're going to do is come back to the original polynomial, or the original equation, and take the 2x squared and remove the 7x and write set plus 7x as minus 3x plus 10x. Okay, because together those are still plus 7x, but I've separated it into two different terms. So then we have the minus 15 and the equal 0. And now that there's 4 terms as opposed to 3 because I separated the middle guy, this would be a great time to do factor by grouping. And so anyways, here's how we do that. We'll group the first 2 terms, and we'll group the last 2 terms, and then we'll pull out any common factors from each group. The first one, we can pull out an x, and I think that's about it. So we have an x times 2x minus 3. And then out of the second term, I can pull out looks like a 5. And so pull out a 5, and 5 out of 10x would leave 2x, and 5 out of 15 would make 3. Still equal to 0, of course. Now this is not a product yet because I still have a plus sign, but what I do notice is I have a common factor here of 2x minus 3. They both have one. So I can factor that common factor out, that 2x minus 3, and that would leave me with a leftover of x from the first term and a plus 5 from the second term after those 2x minus 3's have been factored out of there. And it's equal to 0. And so what I've done is I've taken my quadratic equation and written it as a product equal to 0. And so here's where the 0 property comes in that you likely remember. The 0 property says that if you have a product that's equal to 0, like something times something equals 0, guaranteed the only way a product can be 0 is if either the first guy is equal to 0 or the second guy. That's the only way. You can't multiply 2 non-zero numbers and get 0. So we're going to use that to our advantage. If we have a product equal to 0, that means that either 2x minus 3 must be 0, or x plus 5 would have to be 0. And so those 2 linear equations are going to lead me to my 2 answers. I'll start with the x plus 5. Subtract 5 to the right, we get x equals negative 5. Let me put a box around that, save that. Negative 5 for x would be one of the solutions to this equation. I'd encourage you to try it. Take these x's out and plug in negative 5, and you'll get 0. Now what about 2x minus 3 equals 0? Well, we'll add the 3 to the right, so 2x equals 3. and then divide both sides by 2. I'm kind of running out of space here. You get x equals 3 halves. And so that would be another solution to this quadratic equation. So a lot of times you'll find that quadratic equations will have a lot of times 2 solutions like we have here. Now, I'm not going to take the 3 halves and plug it in. I'd encourage you to. And you'll notice that when you do plug it in, you will in fact get 0. So that's how we solve by factoring. We take our quadratic equation, we factor it, set the individual factors equal to 0, and solve the individual linear equations.